Good morning. Tēnā koutou katoa. My name's Graham Hickling, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to the first of our mammal pest talks for Biosecurity Bonanza 2024. We'll be here all week giving talks, but today it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bruce Warburton from here at our Lincoln office, and Dr. Geoff Kaine, who's based up in Hamilton, although he says he's actually in Kawhia today. And they're going to talk to us about their recent wallaby work. Questions have been disabled. If you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll try and get to them at the end. If we run out of time for questions at the end, we will be getting back to everybody within the next week. And also the presentation itself will go up online within the next week as well. So with no further ado, I will pass over to Bruce.
Thanks, Graham. I'll just share my screen. Well, kia ora koutou. Thanks for joining into this seminar. So this is about illegal releases of wallabies. And if they are illegally released, do they stay where they are released? And why do some people release wallabies and other species illegally? So I've given my part of the talk before at a LINC seminar, so I'm just going to go through this reasonably quickly, but it's just to set a context to be followed by Geoff, who's one of our sort of quantitative social scientists, and he's been looking at why and what are the motivations on why some people might illegally release wallabies or other species. So this work is funded by, or was funded by, the Ministry of Primary Industries through their National Wallaby Eradication Program, which is Tipu Mātoro. So just thanks to MPI. Just a reminder that we do have wallabies in New Zealand, and we have 5 species. So there's 4 of them on Kauai Island: brush-tail rock wallabies, swamp wallabies, dama and palmer. And we have 2 of those species also at Rotorua. So the dama and palmer are in Rotorua. And in the South Island, we have the largest of the wallabies that were introduced into New Zealand, the Bennett's wallabies. So the issue we have is that there's historically they've been in an area in here. If I turn on my laser here, they've historically, Bennett's in the South Island have been in this area of South Canterbury, and the Canterbury Regional Council that manage the species through their Regional Pest Management Plan have this containment area, this black line here. But there's wallabies outside this containment area, and we can assume and be reasonably safe in assuming that these animals around the periphery are sort of natural dispersers, so that they've escaped through that containment barrier or boundary. But some of these animals we know haven't arrived in these locations away north of the containment area or south of it through natural dispersal. These animals are more than likely have been illegally released. And similarly for the dama and palmer in the North Island. So again, we have a containment area here, but there's lots of animals now outside the containment area. Some of those, again, will be natural dispersal, but some of them will be illegally released or releases. So the National Wallaby Eradication Program, their objective, their 2025 objective, is that wallabies are contained within those designated containment areas by eliminating the outlying populations, reducing numbers within the buffer area inside the containment area, and developing innovative sort of wallaby detection and control methods. But the focus I've highlighted there is eliminating the outlier populations. You can put a lot of resources, a lot of effort into identifying where those outliers are, a lot of effort into removing them and confirming you've removed them. But there's little point in doing that if people are going to continue to illegally release them. It'll just be an ongoing challenge. So it's really critical that we try and understand why people might illegally release and try and reduce that risk as much as we can. So my part of the talk is just around about a pilot trial, and as I said, I gave this at a Link seminar, so I'll go through it quite quickly. We wanted to know if wallabies were translocated, so like illegally released into an area with no other wallabies, do they stay at that release site or do they move away? So that is, do they show a high fidelity to their release sites? And why would we do this? And there was some other reasons for doing it, but relevant to this seminar. If wallabies are illegally released and there is a reported sighting, is it worth a council investing in resources into searching for them? You know, if they stay where they are, then it's probably worth it. If they move significant distances and frequently, then it's probably not worth investing resources into searching for them. So how did we do this? It was a pilot trial, so we just had 3 males and 3 females. We brought them back to our animal facility at Lincoln and sterilised them. The males got vasectomies and the females ovarectomies. We put satellite collars on them and we got fixes from those wallabies every 2 hours that were uploaded via satellite every 12 hours. So we could keep track of where they were released and where they went subsequently. The release sites, we had one in Canterbury near Lake Heron, sort of southwest of Mount Hutt, and 2 down in the Maniatoto. So a pair were released in Ida Valley and a pair at Patearoa, and a male and female pair at Lake Heron. So there was 3 pairs released. So over the first 5 months, they didn't move much at all, so their maximum sort of distances were sort of 2, maybe 3 kilometres. The larger map on the right there is just number B4, which is this one here. So the triangle was its release site, and in the first 2 days, it just went up over this mountain range into the next catchment, and then moved into the Cameron Valley, if people know the area up near Lake Heron. And it remained in this location for a month or 2, and then it shifted downstream and set up shop here for quite a while before we shot it at the end of the trial. So for those first 5 months, they pretty well stayed put where they were released. They didn't move much at all. But we had trouble removing, tracking them down and shooting them, which we had to as part of our proposal. But as we went into spring, there was 4 left, so we shot 2, and of the 4 that were still alive, 3 of them decided to move, and this is just one of them, an example of one that was released near Patearoa. It moved up the western side of the Rockinpilla Range, round the northern side, and then back down the eastern side towards Middlemarch. So it moved about 40 kilometres. So just summarise these results. Their mean daily movements were sort of less than about 2.5 kilometres. So larger than a home range of a typical wallaby within the containment area, but still not large movements. So that was during that first sort of 5 months. But after that, when those ones that did shift, we had 2 that moved up to 40 kilometres. So all stayed at or close to the release site for the first 5 to 6 months, April to October, and then 3 of the remaining 4 shifted in the spring and summer. So this is tentative, and I emphasise tentative evidence that wallabies may stay at the release site during the autumn-winter period, but shift in the spring and summer. Those that move are very difficult to locate and kill, so it's really, really challenging for councils to try and remove these animals that are illegally released. So the question is, why do people release them? And we need to understand that more than we do currently. So I'll pass over to Geoff now. Thanks, Geoff.
Thanks, Bruce. Kia ora, everyone. So my job was to sort of try to understand why people might catch and release wallabies. And we used a 3-stage process to do that. So the first thing we did was to have a look at the international literature, and that wasn't really overly helpful, basically because most of the literature was around illegal hunting, and the bit we found around studies on illegal release were primarily around fish and hogs in the United States. So not a lot of insights from the literature review. In the second stage, the second stage was much more helpful. In that stage, we interviewed a range of people from regional and central government, people from environmental, hunting and animal welfare organisations and associations, and basically asked them their thoughts on why people might do this. And then in the third stage, we used the findings from the interviews to design a survey which was distributed to the general public and to stakeholders. And the purpose of the survey was to statistically or quantitatively test the findings from the interviews and to actually estimate the proportion of people that might support catch and release. Thanks, Bruce. So our findings from the literature review and the interviews, we had 4 main ones. The first was that it seemed that the catch and release of wallabies was most likely motivated by a desire among hunters to improve recreational opportunities, together with a desire to take advantage of commercial opportunities in relation to hunting and the utilisation of wallaby meat. And I'll just emphasise that this is what people thought. The second was that there's a reasonable likelihood that wallabies have been raised as pets and subsequently released into the wild once they've matured and become difficult to manage. And in these situations, hunters are most likely the sources of those pet wallabies. The third possibility concerns animal welfare, that there might be some motivation to illegally release individual wallabies that might have been rescued after they've been rehabilitated. And finally, it seems the accidental release of wallabies from private zoos or petting farms seemed rather unlikely, especially in the future, given the regulations governing these enterprises now and the licensing system that regulates the number of wallabies that they can keep, the design of their enclosures, whether or not they can breed, and how they source replacement stock. So the key finding there is that whoever's releasing wallabies, they're either a hunter or they've obtained a wallaby from a hunter. So what we then did was to develop our survey, and we made people's perceptions of wallabies and hunting and the views of hunters as the focus of the survey. We asked a bunch of questions on people's beliefs about the effects of wallabies on the environment and farmland, and questions about their support for the environment, for protecting farmland, for eradicating wallabies, and for catching and releasing wallabies. Okay, so the survey went out to 1,000 members of the public, and these 1,000 were members of a commercial consumer internet panel. So these weren't people that had a special interest in wallabies in any way. And the survey also went out to over 200 members of stakeholder organisations. And I'd particularly like to thank those organisations for distributing the survey to their members, like the Game Animal Council and Forest and Bird in particular, as well as MPI. And I probably should note that overall, around about 18% of our 1,200 respondents said that they went hunting. Thanks, Bruce. So I'll present two sets of results. One is the key results with regard to the public. So that's the 1,000 members of the consumer panel, and then some results that are specific to hunters. So the good news is that we've found that only a small proportion of the public, about 6%, so 6 out of 1,000, had a strongly favourable attitude towards catch and release. And it seems these people tended to support catch and release because they had a strongly unfavourable attitude to eradicating wallabies. These people believe that wallabies are economically and socially useful, that they are less damaging to the environment and farmland than other pests like pigs and possums. They think hunting helps control wallabies, that's recreational hunting. They think hunting wallabies is unsafe and costly, so dangerous to people, dangerous to livestock. And they think recreational hunting is as effective as government baiting in controlling wallabies. Okay. So the good news is that nearly everyone in the general public opposes catch and release, and nearly everyone's willing to report seeing wallabies. Thanks, Bruce. So with regards to hunters, again, a very small proportion, so in this case only 5% of hunters had a strongly favourable attitude towards catch and release. So basically, these hunters wished that there were more wallabies and that wallabies had a greater range, basically so it was easier to go and hunt them. They believed that wallabies were becoming more difficult to find, so hunting was becoming more unsafe for them and more costly for them. They believed recreational hunting was as effective as government programs in controlling wallabies. They think hunting is as effective as poison baiting, using poison baits to control wallabies. They think wallabies are economically useful, and they do not think wallabies are as damaging as other invasive pests, such as pigs and possums. Thanks, Bruce. So our suggestions as to how to increase reporting of wallaby sightings and to reduce catch and release, we had 4 suggestions. Because the general public is quite protective or supportive of protecting the environment and protecting farmland, we suggested that an advertising campaign describing the damage that wallabies do to farming and to the environment, linked to reporting, would encourage the general public to report wallaby sightings. Second, we thought that because hunters viewed themselves as skilled and knowledgeable and setting a good example for others, there's potential to discourage that small group that might be interested in catch and release by promoting the idea that catch and release is improper hunting behaviour. We also thought that it's possible that a program linking farmers and hunters together would help to reduce the time and effort finding wallabies to hunt, which would reduce the incentive to catch and release wallabies. And finally, we suggested that allowing pet wallabies to be released into containment areas would reduce the chances that pet wallabies might be released outside those areas. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Geoff. So just a reminder for everybody to report your wallaby sightings. There is a website, so if you do see a wallaby or more than one wallaby outside the containment area, please report it online. So thank you, and yeah, if we have any questions, we can answer those. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you, Geoff and Bruce. As Bruce says, there's opportunity to put questions in the chat, and while you think about that, I've got a question for you, Geoff. That final comment about releasing pets, did you get any data from your survey about to what extent there are people around with pet wallabies? And also, you had 55 wallaby permit holders, which seems like quite a lot. What kind of situations do people have those permits?
So that 55 came from the way we recruited them was that MPI sent out a link to the survey to a list they had of permit holders, which was quite extensive. So these are people that have private zoos and petting farms. My understanding is that not all of those permit holders actually have wallabies. So that it might be overestimating a bit the actual number that actually have wallabies out there.
And did any of the just general public survey respondents say, hey, I've got one, or I used to have one, or
no, because if you don't have a permit, well, there's two things. One, if you don't have a permit, it's illegal to have a wallaby. And since catch and release is illegal as well, we're bound by ethics. We can't ask people if they've engaged in illegal behaviour. So we couldn't ask those questions. And even if we did, people probably wouldn't answer them honestly anyway. Yeah.
Thanks, Geoff.
Yeah.
Question for Bruce from Helen. During the experiment where the wallabies were released and tracked, were any sightings reported by trampers or farmers?
Yes, one of them was. So one of the pair that were released at Lake Heron travelled down Lake Creek into the Rakaia, and then it crossed the Rakaia into the bottom of Matthias, and then it came back across the Rakaia, and there was several farms that travelled through, and it was reported twice. So there's some evidence that public sightings are useful. Just what that detection probability is associated with the public, we don't know. But in this case, one of those 6 wallabies were reported.
Geoff, a separate question: was there any information from your survey about reporting? Is there some people that will and some people that won't? Any information there?
Yes, Graham. So we did ask people a bunch of questions about reporting, and what we found was that people who were hunters, environmentalists, or animal welfare people or animal rescue people were much more likely to report seeing wallabies than anyone else.
Thanks, Geoff. Okay, another question from the chat. Bruce, how do you think sterilising wallabies might have affected their roaming behaviour?
Good question. The males were vasectomised to keep their sexual sort of physiology intact. So we believe that would have been the case for males. For females, we chose to do ovarectomies because most of the year the females are pregnant, so they're not in estrus. If we had given them a tubal ligation, which we could have, it would have basically put them into permanent estrus, which would have been more atypical than the ovarectomy. So, I mean, the reasons we did what we did was to try and maintain their normal behaviour. So I don't think the dispersal, the movement behaviour that we found would have been atypical of intact animals.
Thanks, Bruce. Question from Christine. How do you plan to respond to the beliefs that hunters are just as good at controlling wallaby numbers as the government?
We were not going to address that directly because when you sort of think about it, in terms of the hunters themselves, we've got like at most 10 people that strongly support catch and release. Rather than trying to change their belief about hunting and its effects, there's more potential in getting other hunters to influence them by encouraging the view that catch and release is not good hunting behaviour. So peer pressure, really.
Right.
If I can just add, clearly hunters can't control wallaby numbers, or we wouldn't have the problem. Yeah, so clearly we have the problem in the presence of a whole lot of hunters, so that they're just not effective.
A comment from Peter: promoting releases of pet wallabies into existing containment areas would probably be illegal under the Biosecurity Act and the RPMP in place, although Peter said he can see why that would be better than doing it, releasing them somewhere else. So what's the implications of that?
Yeah, that MPI would have to turn a blind eye, I guess, pretend it didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what the alternative to euthanasia.
Yes, you could get vets. That's the other alternative would be to allow vets to euthanize wallabies and
Which
not have to
obviously,
report them.
if you've got a legal pet, there's probably several reasons why you might not go that route.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, if there aren't any, oh, you've got one. Is there a higher proportion of younger hunters that support catch and release?
We couldn't tell because it's so small. The numbers that are involved are just way too small to be able to tell.
Thanks. Okay. What drove the decision to have ongoing containment areas instead of eradication?
I think it's a pragmatic thing. So we've had a core area both in the North Island and in the South Island where wallabies have been for 100 years, and the containment boundaries are based on physical features, big rivers or some topographical feature that might slow their spread. So the program, I mean, it is a national eradication program, but the first step is to try and identify the wallaby populations outside the containment boundaries, get rid of them, and then gradually shrink that containment area and eventually eradicate. So that's the long-term aspirational goal, I guess, but the first step is to try and eliminate these outlying populations. And there's a lot of learning involved in doing that. How well can we detect those animals? How well can we remove them? And then can we confirm that we've removed them?
Thanks, Bruce. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask one more question. We've got at least two more beyond that, and we'll respond to those after the session. And so if there are any other questions, feel free to put them in, but we'll deal with them later. So just as a final question, acknowledging this was a one-off survey, did you detect any social trends towards animal welfare considerations versus the ethics of control, shooting, toxins, and so on?
Not really. What we found in this once-off survey was that most people are supportive of eradicating wallabies, but we didn't go into detail as to the various methods by which that could be done. Yeah, but there is a report available if people are interested in reading more about what we discovered.
Okay, and that's a good point. There'll be a link to this presentation and also links to the reports that were written up on this work that has a lot more detail. So we'll wrap it up there. We'll respond to the remaining questions separately. Just a reminder that Biosecurity Bonanza carries on all week. There's a weed session this afternoon, and then the same pattern for the rest of the week with pests and weeds alternating. So thank you all very much for joining us, and I hope you'll feel interested in joining some of the other talks.
Thanks, Graham.
Thank you.